All right, I'm going to get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Orson Morrison, and you are attending a virtual community talk focused on transitioning back to in-person school. A little bit about my background. I am the director of DePaul Family and Community Services. We are a full-service child, adolescent, and family behavioral health clinic located on the Lincoln Park campus of DePaul University. We provide individual and family therapy, psychological assessments, as well as partnering with various schools and school districts to improve access to quality behavioral health services. I'm also the father of two boys, ages 11 and 14, and I'm an Oak Park resident, and so I'm very familiar with the Oak Park School District, both the elementary school and the high school. Wanted to talk a little bit about our partnership with the Oak Park Township, just so everybody is aware. We, a few years ago, received a grant through the Oak Park Township to provide access, supports, and services to students across the district struggling with anxiety, depression, and executive functioning challenges. And through this grant, we're doing a number of different things. We are doing these virtual community talks on a broad range of mental health related topics, really to support youth and families struggling with various social and emotional challenges. We're also offering school-based groups using mindfulness-based approaches. So in 4 schools, Brooks, Julian, Irving, and Holmes, we are offering mindfulness-based groups using a model called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And it's really about teaching kids how to be in the present moment, how to recognize their thoughts, their feelings, their body sensations, and using that information to make better decisions about coping and managing various emotions. We also provide individual and family therapy at the school and at home. In addition, we have some care coordinators on our team that serve more like a case manager. So really assessing families' needs in terms of other sorts of supports around the community and making those linkages and referrals to other supports. Feel free to reach out to me at any point by emailing me if you have any questions about our programming and our partnership with D97 and more recently D200. You can also reach out to your school principal or school social worker if you happen to be connected to either one of those 4 schools. Throughout the pandemic, we've been providing the services virtual, but the plan is to offer in-person services this fall. Little bit about the outline for tonight. I'm going to be talking about really understanding this particular transition into the fall semester and why it's so unique. The bulk of the presentation is going to be focused on really practical strategies and how to manage our stress and help our kids manage their stress and anxiety during this transition back to school. I will end with a brief mindfulness activity. A lot of our work here in the district has been drawing upon mindfulness-based strategies. So I thought it would be nice to just incorporate a brief mindfulness activity just to highlight how important this strategy can be in managing our stress and anxiety. A few housekeeping items here. Feel free to post your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and I will stop periodically and take a look and try my best to answer the questions. We are recording this session tonight for future playback, and typically the district will post these to the website. I'll also send a recording of tonight's presentation to anybody who registered for the talk. So if you happen to not be able to stay with us for the whole session or have to leave early for whatever reason, I will be emailing you a recording of this presentation. And if you could remain muted throughout the presentation until the end, when I will unmute folks who have questions. So transitioning back to school during this COVID pandemic, why is this unique? Right? So we know that COVID has really been associated with very, very severe illness, and in some situations, death, right? So there's this heightened anxiety, there's this risk associated with being in person, particularly for those that are unvaccinated or have underlying medical health conditions. We are all living through this period of time with this increased levels of uncertainty, and this is causing a lot of psychological distress and just kind of wearing everybody down, right? When we are living in uncertainty, when we're not in control of the things around us that are important to us in our lives, we become stressed, we become anxious. It activates that part of the brain. Our regular routines have not been so regular, right? So we've had to pivot, we've had to change the way we learning online. We've had to, reduce our social routines, not seeing family members, loved ones, friends in person. School has looked very different over the past 18 months, right? There's been hybrid models, there have been remote models, and there's been a lot of changes throughout the past 18 months. And children, as well as adults, have had fewer opportunities to socialize in person. And so we're all a little rusty with regards to our social skills and just what it feels like to be in a group of people again, communicating, having conversations, socializing. So we're all a little out of practice. So it is, a little bit challenging for particularly the young ones. What we know in terms of the research, we have very little research actually on COVID-19 and what this has meant for our social emotional health. But from other sorts of pandemics and health related crises over the years, there have been some research. And we do know that the longer a quarantine period lasts, the longer it's going to take for us to really bounce back and to adapt and to adjust after this pandemic or this period of quarantine has truly ended. We may see avoidance behaviors persist with the return of baseline taking up to several months. I mean, we have to remind ourselves that we have been living through this global pandemic now for 18 plus months. And so it's going to take weeks and months to really get reacclimated and readjusted to life in person again. We also need to think about, factors that impact our mental health, our wellness, both in terms of those underlying vulnerabilities as well as protective factors, right? So we need to know and we need to think about factors such as mental health. Maybe one had a previous mental health condition like anxiety or depression, or maybe there's been some financial struggles or strains, or maybe there's a disability of some sort that has also impacted life. We've also seen a lot of focus on racial reconciliation around our history around racism in this country. And so for some groups of people, there's been that added level of stress, right? And so all of these factors really, really will compound and interact to make this transition particularly unique and challenging. One thing that we do need to remember is that the priority needs to be social emotional health during this transition, right? Although kids are transitioning back to school and academics are super important, not centering social emotional health is really going to be problematic. We know that kids who are socially, emotionally well, who are feeling comfortable, who are feeling safe, are going to be doing better academically. So the emphasis over this transitional period really needs to be on kids' social emotional health. And I know a lot of schools and school districts are really putting resources into making sure that kids are supported in this way. We need to help kids develop comfort and talking to them about that this is going to be a process. This is going to be a period of adjustment, right? It's not going to be perfect. We are going to do this day by day, week by week, and eventually adapt back to this way of being in person again. We're also going to need to really prioritize and strengthen relationships. And I'm going to talk about relationships in a bit, but you know, we've been socially isolated from one another, and we are social beings. Human beings are social beings, and we need relationships in order to thrive socially and emotionally. And so there needs to be this emphasis on how do we reconnect with one another. And also really focusing on building up resilience. So how do we promote self-confidence, independence, healthy risk-taking in our children? So these are some of the things I'll be talking about in just a moment. So as we think about some of the strategies that might be helpful for our children, one that comes to mind is reflection. So before we really dive right into being back in person is really kind of reflecting on where we've been. So taking a pause, taking a moment to really think, what have the last 18 months been like? You know, what are the positives? What are the challenges associated with this period of time? Maybe there were things that they've learned this year that that will really serve them well as they transition back to in-person school. Perhaps there are things that occurred or experiences they've had that they don't really want to let go of, right? And so I think we all, even as adults, as parents, maybe we've spent more time together as a family. Do we want to lose that as we transition back to the in-person world? So really having that conversation with your child and with your family for that matter. What are the things that we really don't want to let go of? How can we maybe incorporate that into our life even as we transition back to school and back to work? Another strategy is just communication, and related to communication, validation. So spending time, carving out time to have these conversations, to check in with your child or your student about how they've been feeling about this transition. Recognize and normalize that every one of us is feeling some degree of nervousness, of anxiety, of uncertainty. It is just part of our kind of collective experience at this moment as it relates to COVID-19, right? So normalize that, really let them know that they're not alone in this. All kids, all families are thinking about this and feeling these things to some degree or another. We're also going to listen and not lecture, you know, to youth's emotional challenge. We really want to create a warm and safe and responsive interaction here. It's easy for parents and adults to sort of swoop in and try to fix when our children are hurt or anxious or nervous. But really, an important strategy is just to sort of sit and be with your child in this moment. Be vulnerable with your child as well. Let them know that the ways in which you've struggled with going back to work, for instance, in person, or reconnecting with friends or family members, and also model for them how you've been coping. So, maybe you've gone to therapy, or maybe you've started to exercise. So talking to your kids about the ways in which you've dealt with your stresses can be really helpful too. And again, recognizing that we're all feeling some level of uncertainty. The next strategy I'm going to talk about is just reconnecting. Okay, again, we're wanting to emphasize relationships. We have been doing a lot of relationships online. And so when we think about relationships, think broadly about relationships. Think about the parent-child relationship, the teacher-child relationship, relationships between your child and other children, and the relationship between parents and teachers, or parents and schools. These are all really, really essential types of relationships as we think about that transition back to school. And we're in July now, July the 14th. So we have a bit of time. We have about a month or so to think about how to do this in a gradual way. So if that hasn't already occurred, kind of thinking about how do we gradually increase the amount and the breadth of in-person activities. And of course, we want to be thinking about and listening to our public health officials in terms of the appropriate guidance related to who's vaccinated and who's not vaccinated, and particularly for our younger children who are not vaccinated, that looks a little different. Focus on activities that really facilitate reconnection, right? So play, particularly for younger kids, and even teens and even adults need play. But incorporating more play into one's life in person can be really helpful. Having conversations, having a shared experience, right? So maybe your child is in a camp program, or maybe somebody down the street has a new puppy and they want to share, introduce this puppy to the neighborhood. Those are all sort of experiences that are shared and can really facilitate a sense of connection again. We also want to prepare our children for relationship shifts. For some kids, they've been only communicating and interacting online with each other. And so over that period of time in a child's life, that can be a really, really long time. And so over that time, kids have changed a lot, and maybe they've developed new interests, or maybe they've reconnected or connected to other kids. And so we need to also prepare kids for that when you go back in person, there may be some slight shifts. You may not want to hang out with this person anymore, or this person may not want to hang out with you. So thinking about that as well. Related to adult-child relationships, there are some kind of factors here that I want to just highlight. We know that modeling is super important. So we want to, the best we can, stay grounded and stay in control of our emotions, right? It's not to say that we're not also struggling with uncertainty and anxiety, but doing it in a way that is not overwhelming for our children, right? Our children are watching us. They are learning from us. How we manage our stress, how we manage our anxiety is super important. Related to this is information transfer. So how do we talk about this transition? Are we really panicked about it? Are we really dreading it? Are we really catastrophizing it? Because if we are, our children are really going to feel anxious about it. Over control. So we do know that when children have a sense of agency, like they can impact their decisions, they can impact their world, they tend to feel a little bit more comfortable about it. So are we really controlling our children's lives, or what are the ways in which we can promote and encourage a bit of independence and choice during this transition? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And of course, rejection or lack of warmth, right? So lack of positivity, acceptance, lack of validation, all of those things can also have an impact. But lots and lots of research suggests that relationships are really, really important for children's well-being, socially, emotionally, academically. And so during these moments that are difficult, that are challenging, prioritizing relationships are very, very, very key. Another strategy would be to refamiliarize. So thinking about, maybe the things that about school that will be the same people, the same places, maybe the same processes, really kind of beginning to refamiliarize, reacquaint ourselves with those things that haven't really changed much. Maybe it's, starting to walk, do the walk to school, the path that they get to school, reacquainting with that. Who will they walk to school with? Maybe doing a couple walks ahead of time with a friend. Establish or reestablish routines and rituals. So of course we're in the summer right now, and a lot of kids' routines and families' routines are not as structured. So beginning to think about what are those routines and rituals that will be in place, that will need to be in place by the start of the school year, and begin to kind of talk about those routines and gradually move back to those routines. And of course, just practice. The more that we gradually, step by step, reintegrate these aspects of our experiences into our lives, the easier it's going to be with the transition. I alluded to this earlier, but promoting independence. So, encourage your youth, your children to make their own decisions. So thinking about things like maybe practicing making lunch, talking about the sorts of things they might want for lunch when they go back to school, maybe having them help out and do some dry runs with practicing that. Helping them maybe go through their clothes, what fits, what doesn't, what sort of clothes do they want for this new school year, getting them kind of excited, but also taking the lead on some of that can really help them feel a sense of control over this experience. Planning for school supplies, going shopping for school supplies, those sorts of things as well. We need to manage our own fears. We as parents and adults have our own worries about kids transitioning back to school in person, particularly for those that are not vaccinated. Collaboration, very, very important here. Lots and lots of research as well, suggesting that the ways in which parents and teachers collaborate, communicate with one another, really impact the way in which children experience school. So when kids are seeing that parents and their teachers and parents and the school system are feeling positively about each other, they're communicating in a positive way, they're sharing information, talking about the best interest of that student is going to feel more positively about school. So if your particular child is struggling, maybe they've talked about not wanting to go back to school in the fall, or maybe they're feeling anxious, definitely start to think about ways to reach out to the school and share that information so that the school is equipped to support your child as they transition back to school. Begin to identify school-based supports that may be needed. So whether that be a particular person, a school social worker, a teacher that they really are connected to, or specific activities. Maybe the school is offering group supports like the ones that we're doing at a few schools in the district. Just briefly about social media and tech use. We all know that tech use has really, really dramatically increased over the pandemic. It has been a lot of kids' primary way of connecting socially, and of course, also academically. And so as parents, we need to start thinking about, well, what do we want this to look like as kids transition back to in person, right? So I think you need to ask yourself, what are the benefits of the particular type of social media or tech use your child is using? And not all tech is equal, right? So we know that kids can use tech in a very passive way, so they can sort of just be sitting in front of a screen all day in isolation, or they can be using it to stimulate their minds, to create, to explore the world, to learn, and also to connect socially. So also asking yourself, what are the benefits of allowing my child to use this type of media or this type of tech? We also want to be mindful of how much is too much. And so asking yourself, well, what are the other essential things that my child needs in order to be healthy, right? So eating well, sleeping well, exercising, all of these things are really essential and necessary. Socializing, family time, all of those things need to also be there. And so if the tech use is displacing those other important aspects, that is problematic. So beginning to think about, okay, yes, we've had a lot of tech over the last 18 months, but we're going to be transitioning away from that as much as possible. And these are the sorts of things that we want to see more balance in. Physical health, of course, is very, very, very important. It helps to manage stress, anxiety. It helps to facilitate connections, especially if you're doing sort of group-based physical activities, sports, outdoor recreational programs, those sorts of things. It's a really great way over the summer to practice being in person again with other peers and adults. Some more sort of professional, sort of psychotherapy related concepts I think are really also useful to go over here. There's this concept called radical acceptance versus change in a model called dialectical behavior therapy, right? And so it's this balance between accepting the things that we cannot change about our current reality, and also looking at the things that we can change. So finding this balance between acceptance and change can be really, really helpful. And you can have a conversation with your child about, well, what are the things that we actually don't have control over, right? Related to this pandemic or this transition. There is going to be some aspect of risk associated with being in person that we can't really change. We do know that the school is doing X, Y, and Z. We do know that the public health departments are telling us this, but this is what we can't really change. On the other hand, these are the things that we can change. We can begin to plan. We can begin to prepare in a gradual way for this transition. We can focus on our self-care. We can, start to exercise. We can start to reconnect with friends, right? So looking at the ways in which they can change, we can change, and also giving them some ownership about what that part of the scale looks like. We can also teach our children to externalize the worry. It becomes problematic when anxiety just becomes so overwhelming and so all-encompassing, where we actually feel like we are anxiety, right? So teaching your children to look at worry and look at anxiety as just part of themselves, or even kind of an external entity. When I work with younger children, we often use this concept of a worry monster, right? So, oh, there's your worry monster. It's kind of rearing its ugly head again. What can we tell worry monster in order to make him feel less worried, right? So having this dialogue with this entity or this part of oneself can make it feel much more manageable. We also have strategies for older kids and teens and adults, such as mindfulness, that actually help to decenter our sense of anxiety or fear from our core sense of self. Right? Recognizing that anxiety is just a sensation. It's just an emotion. It's not all of us. And we're going to talk about mindfulness a little bit later in the presentation. Cognitive restructuring is another technique that we use a lot, right? It's about putting our thoughts on trial, looking at the evidence. So if we have a thought like, oh, we're all going to catch COVID and die. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that thought, but let's do some research. Let's look at what the science is telling us. What does the science say about COVID transmission in schools? What does the science say about deaths to people in your age group? Those are the sorts of things that would help gather evidence for or against that thought. So the hope here is really just to replace that catastrophic thought with a little bit more rational thought. So your anxiety may not go completely away. There's always going to be a slight chance or a slight risk, but it's not going to feel so overwhelming. Mindfulness. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is really about learning how to be in the present moment. When we are anxious, we are either living in the past, like we're really thinking about something that has happened in the past and maybe we're worried that that's going to happen again, or we're anticipating that something really catastrophic is going to happen. And so coming back to the present moment is really one of the core elements of mindfulness. And when we're able to do that, we're really able to pause, and we're really able to have a little bit more space to look at what we're feeling and look at what we're thinking, and then choosing the best response that cares for that feeling or that thought, right? It's this power of observation, really learning how to observe the present moment without judgment, without that impulse to react. And it's a practice that develops and a skill that develops with practice and over time. Yeah, so this is the difference here. When we're in that anxious mode of thought, we're very biased in the thought, right? We're past or future oriented. We're identified with the thought. I am my thought. I am my anxiety. And we're stuck in this loop of rumination over and over and over again. And we're being very judgmental. We're being very critical, harsh, labeling ourselves, labeling our experiences. Whereas mindfulness is really unbiased. We're just observing. A thought is just a thought. An emotion is just an emotion. We're being more present. We're decentering. We're looking at our thoughts. We're looking at our emotions. They're not us. And we are also connecting using all of our senses and into this present experience. And we're approaching it non-judgmentally. I would like to guide you through a brief example of how mindfulness meditation can be useful. It will be about 5 or so minutes. So if you are willing to participate, if you can just get into a comfortable posture, one that helps you to feel alert and awake. And perhaps closing your eyes if you're comfortable with that, or you can just close your eyes slightly and maybe look at an object in your room. And the first step is just becoming aware of what is going on for you in this present moment. So noticing any thoughts that might be floating by. We're noticing particular emotions that you're sitting with right now. Anxiety, worry, fatigue. Maybe also noticing how your body is feeling. Maybe you're hungry and your stomach is rumbling, or you're noticing some tension in your neck. I'm just taking a moment to check in. And once you've been able to check in with yourself right now, gathering your attention and focusing your attention in the middle part of your body, so in your lower abdomen, just sort of guide your attention down to that part of the body and focus on breathing. And just notice how the breath moves in that part of the body. Noticing how the abdomen expands as you inhale and deflates as you exhale. Just be with your body breathing for a moment. And the next step is calling to mind or bringing to mind some sort of a worry you have, but not something super overwhelming, something that you feel like you can be with in this moment, something manageable, something you're worried about, maybe related to going back to school in person or work in person. Just bring that to mind. And again, noticing what thoughts come up, what emotions come up. How does your body feel when you think about this particular worry? And if you notice an emotion, maybe labeling it, maybe saying to yourself, oh, anxiety's here, and I can be with it in this moment. Or tension is here. And if there's a particularly overwhelming emotion or sensation, maybe breathing into it, maybe using the breath. And just expanding that emotion, just softening it a bit. And letting it go on the exhale. Maybe moving the body in a way that loosens that tension or loosens that sense of anxiety. And then in the final step, just allowing your attention to expand back outwards to your whole body. Maybe taking kind of an open and receptive attention. Noticing what's here now. Maybe there's a sense of calm or just openness. And the best you can, as we bring this practice to a close, holding on to that sense of openness and calm as you progress into the next thing in your day. Well, thank you for participating in that mindfulness activity. We do know that children's mental health is really, really significant right now. And we do know that a lot of kids, adults are struggling. And so if we see as parents and adults any problematic coping, so emotions that seem really intense or that are chronic in nature. They keep happening, or they keep experiencing intense emotions over several weeks, for instance. Or there's avoidance of your efforts to reintroduce them gradually to being in person again. Maybe they're talking about not wanting to go back to school, refusing to go back to school, anger, aggression, substance use. These are all things that are signs that your child may need some additional supports as you think about this transition. And so being mindful about recognizing that these are some of the signs that that something else may be needed in preparation and support of this transition. So again, yeah, impairment in functioning, prolonged changes in emotions, not eating, not sleeping, poor hygiene, continued struggles after the end of pandemic or through this transition as we move into this transitional phase. Talking with your child as much as you can about what may be helpful. Using their decision-making to select supports, maybe searching for a therapist together, or giving them options that might be useful. Being involved as a parent also in that treatment process is really, really helpful. The Oak Park Township has this website, the healthconnectionhub.org, which lists a lot of community resources. So if you're searching for supports, you can always go to this website. Or of course, speak with your primary care physician or pediatrician about supports in the community. D97 also offers this texting line, which connects students to trained mental health professionals. So if there's any sort of emotional crisis, they can use this texting line and be immediately connected to somebody who can support. And that brings me to the conclusion of tonight's presentation. I do have a very, very, very brief evaluation survey. We're constantly collecting data and feedback on how these community talks are useful for adults, parents, teachers, and so we really value your opinion on that. I am going to see if there's anything in the chat, or if anybody on the line has any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Let's see here. Great. Thank you for the presentation. Some great information. You're very welcome. All right. Does anybody have any other questions that I can answer? Well, thank you so much for attending tonight. And again, I will be emailing you a copy of this presentation so that you can view it at your leisure at other times. Thank you and have a great rest of your summer.